I'd always thought my life was something out of a dream. My name's Daniel, and for the last 12 years, I've been married to Claire. She's the kind of woman who turns heads without trying. Long auburn hair, green eyes that sparkle like emeralds, and a laugh that could melt the iciest heart. We met in college back when I was a gangly engineering major and she was studying art history. Somehow, I convinced her to give me a chance, and we built a life together. A good one. 2 kids, Emma, 9, and Lucas, 6. A house in the suburbs with a wraparound porch, and jobs that kept us comfortable. I'm a structural engineer, and Claire works part-time at a gallery downtown. Weekends were for soccer games, movie nights, and barbecues with the neighbors. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. I'd never been the jealous type. Claire had her friends, her little escapes, girls' nights out, yoga classes, gallery openings, and I had mine. Trust was the foundation of us. She'd come home from her outings flushed and happy, chattering about some new artist or a ridiculous story from her friend Margot. I'd listen, pour her a glass of wine, and we'd collapse into bed, her head on my chest. That was our rhythm. I didn't question it because I didn't have to. She was mine and I was hers, or so I thought. It started with small things. A missed call here, a text she'd laugh off as just Margot being Margot. I didn't think much of it. Life gets busy, right? But then there was the night she came home late from a gallery event, later than usual. Her hair was mussed, her lipstick smudged, and she smelled faintly of something musky, not her usual floral perfume. "Long night," she'd said, brushing past me to the bathroom. I stood there, holding her coat, feeling a tiny crack form in the perfect little world I'd built in my head. I shook it off. People get tired. Makeup smears. Nothing to it. But the cracks kept growing. She started guarding her phone like it was a state secret, tilting the screen away when I walked by. Once, I caught her smiling at it. Really smiling the way she used to smile at me. And when I asked who it was, she said, "Oh, just a client." Client. At 10 p.m. on a Saturday. I'm not proud of it, but I started paying attention. The late nights multiplied. The excuses got flimsier. And that musky scent? It clung to her more often than not. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. Claire wouldn't do that to me. To us. Would she? I couldn't shake the feeling. It gnawed at me. A quiet, persistent ache that wouldn't let me sleep. I'd lie awake next to her, watching her breathe, wondering who she was dreaming about. Was it me, or someone else? I started noticing details I'd overlooked. How she'd linger in the shower. How she'd hum tunes I didn't recognize. How her wardrobe shifted to tighter dresses and sharper heels. She was glowing, radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. I should have been happy for her. Instead, I felt like I was drowning. One Thursday, she said she had a work thing and wouldn't be home until midnight. The kids were at my sister's for a sleepover, so I had the house to myself. I tried to work, to distract myself with blueprints and calculations, but my mind kept drifting. Where was she? Who was she with? I poured a whiskey, then another, and before I knew it, I was in our bedroom, staring at her dresser. Her jewelry box sat there, innocent and unassuming. I'd never snooped before, never had a reason to, but that night, something pulled me toward it. Inside, beneath a tangle of necklaces, was a receipt. A hotel bar, downtown, dated 2 weeks ago. $38 for 2 drinks. She told me she was at Margot's that night watching some artsy film. I sat on the bed, the paper trembling in my hand. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Margot met her there. But Margot doesn't drink. Hasn't since her DUI 5 years back. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket, my chest tightening. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. I needed proof, something solid to hold on to before I tore our life apart. The next day, I called in sick and drove to the gallery. Claire wasn't there. Her coworker said she'd taken a personal day. Personal day. She hadn't mentioned that. I sat in my car across the street, watching the door, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. Around noon, a black Audi pulled up. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a tailored suit. He carried himself like he owned the world. Claire emerged from the gallery, smiling that smile, and kissed him on the cheek. My stomach dropped. They climbed into his car and drove off. I followed. Tailing them wasn't hard. I kept my distance, my pickup blending into traffic. They stopped at a cafe a few miles away, one of those trendy spots with outdoor seating and overpriced coffee. I parked across the street, slouched low, and watched. Claire leaned into him, laughing at something he said. He brushed her hair back, his fingers lingering on her neck. It was intimate, casual, like they'd done this 100 times. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't a client. This wasn't a friend. This was something else. They stayed for an hour, then left together. I followed again, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the engine. The Audi pulled into a hotel parking lot, the same one from the receipt. I watched them walk inside, his hand on her lower back, guiding her like she belonged to him. I didn't go in. Couldn't. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at the entrance, waiting for her to come out. When she did, her hair was down, her blouse untucked. He kissed her, full on the mouth, before she got into her own car and drove away. I didn't move, couldn't breathe. That night, she came home like nothing had happened. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Work was a mess." I nodded, forcing a smile, and poured her wine. She didn't notice my hands shaking. Over dinner, she talked about some exhibit, her voice light and carefree. I watched her lips move, the same lips that had been on his, and felt something dark coil inside me. I didn't confront her then. I needed to know more. Who he was, how long this had been going on, why she'd thrown us away. I started digging. Her phone was locked, but I knew her laptop password, our anniversary. Late that night, while she slept, I crept downstairs and opened it. Her email was a goldmine. Messages from James going back 6 months. Casual at first, gallery talk, art deals, then personal. Flirty, intimate, plans to meet. "Can't wait to see you," he'd written last week. "You're my muse." My muse. I scrolled until my eyes burned, each word a knife in my gut. James Carter, art collector, married, 42. I had a name, I had a face, and I had a plan. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Claire and James, tangled up in some hotel room, laughing at how easy it was to fool me. I went through the motions, work, kids, dinner, but inside, I was unraveling. I stopped eating, stopped talking unless I had to. Claire noticed, asked if I was okay. Just stressed. I lied, and she bought it, probably because she didn't want to look too close. Guilt's funny that way, it blinds you. I tracked James online. He was easy to find, big shot in the art world, all slick smiles and expensive watches. His wife, Laura, was a blonde socialite, always at his side in photos. Did she know? Did she care? I found his office address, his gallery connections, even his gym. I watched him from afar, learning his routines. He liked routine, coffee at 8, meetings by 10, drinks with Claire twice a week. I followed them again, saw them disappear into that hotel again. Each time, the rage grew hotter, sharper. I started planning. Not just confrontation, something bigger. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I dug deeper into James's life, found cracks. He had debts, big ones, hidden behind his polished facade. A gambling habit, whispers of shady deals. Laura's trust fund kept him afloat, but she didn't know about the losses. I filed that away. Claire, though, she was harder to unravel. She'd covered her tracks well, but I found a second phone in her purse one night, tucked in a side pocket. Cheap, prepaid. Texts to him. Plans, promises, little heart emojis. It made me sick. I didn't let on. I smiled, kissed her goodnight, played the part. But every day I built my case. Photos from my phone, blurry shots of them at the cafe, the hotel. Screenshots from her laptop. Recordings of her on the phone, laughing with him while I pretended to sleep. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it all, but I knew it wasn't enough to just leave. I'd given her everything. My trust, my years, my kids' stability. She'd taken it and handed it to him. They'd pay. A month in, I couldn't take it anymore. The evidence was a mountain. Texts, photos, receipts. But it wasn't enough to quiet the storm in my head. I needed to hear it from her. One night, after the kids were asleep, I waited. She came home late again, that musky scent clinging to her like a confession. She smiled, started her usual chatter about work, but I cut her off. "Who's James?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shaking inside me. Her face froze. The smile vanished, replaced by something I'd never seen, fear. "What?" she stammered, buying time. I pulled out the hotel receipt, the one I'd kept like a talisman, and slid it across the table. "Explain this." She stared at it, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "It's not what you think," she said finally. But her eyes said it was exactly what I thought. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I laid out the photos, the texts, the recordings. Piece by piece, I watched her world collapse. She cried, sobbed, really ugly, wrenching sounds that might have moved me once. She admitted it. 6 months with James, stolen moments, a thrill she couldn't resist. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, reaching for my hand. Pulled away. "I still love you," she whispered. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Love? What a joke." I told her to sleep on the couch, that we'd talk tomorrow. She begged, but I was done listening. That night, I sat in the dark, the house silent except for her muffled sobs downstairs. The kids slept, oblivious. I thought about them, Emma's gap-toothed grin, Lucas's obsession with dinosaurs, and what this would do to them. I thought about James, smug and untouchable. I thought about Claire, her tears a cheap mask for her betrayal. And I decided, divorce wasn't enough. Exposure wasn't enough. I wanted revenge, cold, calculated, and complete. They'd taken my life. I take theirs. After that night, the house became a battlefield of silence. Claire moved around me like a ghost, her eyes red, her voice small. I didn't care. I'd built a wall between us, brick by brick, and I wasn't tearing it down. The kids sensed it. Emma asked why Mommy was sad. Lucas clung to me more, but I shielded them as best I could. Grown-up stuff, I'd say, ruffling their hair. They didn't need to know yet. Not until I was ready. I threw myself into planning. Revenge wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a project like the bridges I designed at work. Every piece had to fit, every angle calculated. I started with James. His life was a house of cards. Wealthy on the surface, rotten underneath. I'd found his financial records online, pieced together from public filings and a few discreet calls to old college buddies in banking. Gambling debts, offshore accounts, a failing gallery he'd propped up with Laura's money. If she knew, if his clients knew, he'd crumble. That was my first lever. Claire was trickier. She'd betrayed me, but she was still the mother of my kids. I couldn't destroy her outright, not yet. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to live with it every day. I kept her second phone, the one with James's texts, and made copies of everything. I didn't tell her I had it. Let her wonder. Let her sweat. Meanwhile, I watched her unravel. Jumpy, distracted, checking her reflection like she could see the guilt in the mirror. Good. She deserved that. I spent nights in my office, the door locked, a bottle of whiskey my only company. I mapped it out. Step 1. Dismantle James's world. Step 2. Make Claire face the wreckage. Step 3. Protect my kids through it all. I wasn't sure how it would end, but I knew it wouldn't be quick. Quick was mercy and I was fresh out. I dug deeper into James's life, his routines, his weaknesses. He liked power, control. I'd take it from him, piece by piece, until he had nothing left to hold on to. James's gallery was the heart of his empire, a sleek space downtown where he played king. I started there. Using a burner email, I sent an anonymous tip to a local art blog. Rumors of forged pieces, shady provenance, whispers of insolvency. I attached blurry photos of documents I'd found, doctored just enough to look legit. It wasn't much, but it was a spark. The blog ran with it, and within days, murmurs rippled through the art world. Clients called. Investors hesitated. James issued a statement, smooth, confident, but I saw the cracks forming. Next, I targeted Laura. She was the key to his money, his stability. I printed screenshots of his texts to Claire. Nothing explicit, just enough to hint at something, and mailed them to her from a post office across town. No note, no return address. Let her imagination do the work. A week later, I drove by their house. A sprawling modernist thing with floor-to-ceiling windows, and saw them arguing through the glass. Her arms flailed, his face twisted. I didn't smile, but I felt something close to it. Chaos was spreading just like I'd planned. Claire noticed the shift too. She'd heard about the gallery rumors through her own contacts. Asked me over breakfast if I'd seen the news. Sounds like trouble, I said, sipping my coffee, my tone flat. Her eyes flickered. Did she suspect me? I didn't care. She was still lying, still sneaking calls to James when she thought I wasn't listening. I tapped her phone, not hard with the right software, and heard her whisper, "We need to be careful, careful." Too late for that. I kept my distance, played the numb husband. Work, kids, home. She tried to bridge the gap, cooked my favorite meals, lingered near me, but I shut her out. Every touch, every word from her was a reminder of him. I wasn't ready to confront her again. Not until James was on his knees. I wanted her to see what she'd tied herself to, a sinking ship. And when it went down, I'd make sure she felt the waves. James fought back. He hired a PR firm, spun the rumors as jealousy from rivals. The gallery held an event, big, loud, desperate, to prove he was still on top. I went, blending into the crowd in a cheap suit and glasses I didn't need. Claire was there, of course, hanging on his arm, smiling for the cameras. Seeing her like that, radiant, false, lit a fire in me. I slipped away, found his office upstairs. Unlocked, sloppy. I planted a USB drive with fake invoices, more forged art deals. Nothing traceable to me, just enough to keep the vultures circling. Laura was unraveling too. She'd hired a PI. I saw him tailing James one morning, snapping photos. She didn't confront him publicly, but the tension was bleeding into his life. He looked haggard, snapping at staff, drinking more. I followed him to a bar one night, watched him down scotch after scotch, muttering to himself. Claire met him there, her face tight with worry. They argued, quiet, sharp, then left separately. I stayed, nursing a beer, letting the pieces fall. At home, Claire was a wreck. She'd stopped pretending everything was fine. "I'm sorry," she said one night, cornering me in the kitchen. "I'll end it. I swear." I looked at her, her trembling hands, her pleading eyes, and felt nothing. "Do what you want," I said, walking away. She didn't know I'd already lit the fuse. She didn't know James was a dead man walking. Financially, socially, maybe more. I wasn't done with him yet. I wanted him broken, begging before I turned to her. The kids kept me grounded. Emma's school play, Lucas's dinosaur drawings, they were my tether. I smiled for them, hugged them tight, promised myself they'd come out of this hole. Claire tried to use them too, family dinners, movie nights, but I saw through it. She was clinging to the life she'd torched. I let her, for now. Let her think she had a chance. The real storm was coming, and she wouldn't see it until it hit. Took 3 weeks for James's world to implode. The USB drive did its job. Someone found it, leaked it to a rival collector. The fakes were confirmed by an expert I'd paid off through a proxy. Lawsuits piled up. Clients pulled out. The gallery shut its doors. A temporary closure that fooled no one. Laura filed for divorce, publicly, messily, citing infidelity and fraud. Photos of Claire and James surfaced online, grainy but damning. I didn't plant those. Someone else did. Karma, maybe. I didn't care. It worked. He lost everything fast. The house went into foreclosure. His car got repossessed. I saw him once, outside a dive bar, unshaven and hollow-eyed. He didn't see me. I didn't approach. I just watched, letting the sight of him ruined, alone, sink in. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. Claire felt it too. She came home crying one day, said the gallery had fired her. "It's all falling apart," she sobbed. I nodded, said nothing. She didn't know I'd pulled the strings. She didn't need to. Her friends turned on her. Margot called, furious, said she'd seen the photos. How could you? She'd yelled. I heard it through the wall. Claire's excuses fell flat. She was alone now, no James, no allies. I kept my routine, work, kids, silence. She'd try to talk, to explain, but I'd walk away. The house felt like a prison. Her presence a weight I couldn't shake. I started sleeping in the guest room, locking the door. She'd knock sometimes, late at night, begging through the wood. I didn't answer. I wasn't done with James. Ruining him financially was step one. I wanted him to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the way I had. I found his new address, a rundown apartment on the edge of town. I watched him there, saw him stumble home drunk, alone. I had one more card to play, one more twist to drive the knife deeper. And Claire? She'd get hers soon enough. James's downfall was public, but I wanted it personal. I tracked down his ex-wife's lawyer, sent an anonymous package. Recordings of him and Claire, timestamps matching nights he'd claimed to be elsewhere. Laura's team used it to gut him in court. He lost alimony, lost custody of his own kids. I read about it online, saw his name dragged through the mud. Good. Let him drown in it. Then I went for his pride. I hired a guy, discreet, cash only, to break into his apartment. Nothing big, just enough to rattle him. A smashed mirror, a photo of him and Claire torn up. A note, "You're nothing." Childish, maybe, but I pictured his face, the panic, the realization he wasn't untouchable. I didn't need to see it. Knowing it happened was enough. He'd wake up every day wondering who, why, how. Let him rot in that fear. Claire was next. I'd saved her for last. Let her stew in the wreckage. One night, I sat her down, the kids at my sister's again. "You're leaving," I said, no emotion, just fact. She blinked, confused. I slid a folder across the table. Divorce papers, custody demands, everything I'd compiled. "Sign it or I send this to everyone. Your parents, your boss, the school." Her hands shook as she opened it. Saw the photos, the texts, her life laid bare. "Daniel, please," she whispered. I stood, walked out. She signed by morning. She moved out a week later to some friend's couch. The kids stayed with me. I'd fought for that and she didn't argue. I told them mommy needed space, that we'd be okay. They cried, but they trusted me. Claire called sometimes, pleading to see them. I let her, supervised, short visits. She'd hug them, tears streaming, and I'd watch, stone-faced. She'd broken us. She didn't get to play family anymore. James was gone. A ghost in a ruined life. Claire was a shell. And me? I was still standing, still breathing, still planning the next step. Revenge wasn't over. It was just beginning. The house felt empty with Claire gone. But it was a relief too. No more tiptoeing around her guilt. No more pretending for the sake of peace. The kids adjusted slowly. Emma asked questions I dodged with vague answers. Lucas drew quieter pictures, but we found a new rhythm. I cooked breakfast every morning, pancakes with too much syrup, and we'd talk about school, dinosaurs, anything but her. They were my anchor, the only thing keeping me from sinking into the black hole I'd carved out with my own hands. Claire's absence left a void, but it wasn't regret. It was space to breathe, to think, to refine what I'd started. James was a husk now, a name in tabloid footnotes, but I wasn't satisfied. I'd taken his money, his wife, his pride, but he still walked free, still drew breath in a world I'd been forced to rebuild. Claire, too. She'd lost her job, her friends, her home, but she wasn't suffering enough. Not like I had. Not like I still did. Every time I looked at our wedding photo on the mantel and saw a lie, I kept tabs on them both. James had moved again, a cheaper place, a roach-infested box from what I could see through binoculars. He'd picked up odd jobs, bartending, delivery, nothing like the kingpin he'd been. I'd drive by sometimes, late at night, watching him shuffle home, head down. Claire was crashing with a cousin now, a cramped apartment across town. She'd call the kids, her voice thin and desperate, and I'd listen in, silent, letting her ramble until they handed the phone back. She didn't know I heard every word, every crack in her facade. I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Work gave me focus, long hours, complex projects. The guys at the firm noticed I was sharper, colder. "Divorce'll do that," one said, clapping my shoulder. I nodded, didn't elaborate. They didn't need to know the rest. At home, I painted over the walls Claire had picked, ripped out the garden she'd loved. It wasn't erasure, it was claiming what was mine. The kids helped, splashing paint, laughing. We were a unit now, the three of us, and I'd burn the world down before I let anyone break that again. I wasn't done with James. Ruining him publicly was one thing, but I wanted his name to be poison, untouchable even in the shadows. I started small, anonymous posts on art forums, hints about his past, his debts, his affair. I didn't name Claire, not yet. Let him take the heat. Word spread, slow and steady, until his old circles wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. I heard through a contact he tried to pitch a new venture, some scam about rare prints, and got laughed out of the room. Perfect. Then I went local. Flyers in his neighborhood. Slipped under doors. Grainy photos of him, captions like cheat, fraud, liar. Nothing traceable, just enough to make him a pariah. I'd watch from my truck, parked a block away, as neighbors whispered, pointed. One night, someone keyed his door. Crude, jagged lines. Not my doing, but I didn't mind. He'd built a life on sand, and I was the tide washing it away. He deserved worse, but this was a start. Claire felt the ripple too. Her cousin kicked her out after a fight. Something about money, I heard through Emma's chatter. She found a studio, a dingy place near the industrial district. I drove by once, saw her lugging boxes, alone. She looked older, thinner, her hair dull. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but it died the second I remembered her laugh with him, her lies to me. I sent her an email, short, cold, about custody schedules. No pleasantries. She replied with "thank you," like it meant something. Didn't. The kids kept me sane. Emma's teacher said she was thriving. Lucas won a little art contest at school. I framed his drawing, a lopsided T-Rex, and hung it where Claire's paintings used to be. They asked about her less, trusted my "she's figuring things out" line. I didn't badmouth her to them. She was still their mom, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. They'd learn the truth someday. For now, I was enough. James needed a reminder, something he couldn't ignore. I waited until a rainy night, when the streets were empty, and drove to his building. Hood up, gloves on, I slipped in behind a delivery guy, took the stairs to his floor. His door was flimsy, cheap wood, a weak lock. I didn't break in, just left a gift. A photo of him and Claire, taken from one of my stakeouts, her head on his shoulder. On the back, I wrote in block letters, "SHE wasn't worth it." I taped it to his door, knocked hard, and vanished into the dark. I pictured his face, confusion, then fear, then rage. Good. Let him stew, let him wonder who knew, who watched. I didn't stop there. I mailed him scraps, receipts from their hotel stays, a napkin with her lipstick I'd found in her purse months ago. No notes, just relics of his ruin. He'd know it was personal. He'd feel me breathing down his neck. I wanted him paranoid, jumping at shadows, the way I'd lain awake hearing her lies echo in my head. Claire got her own dose. I sent her a package, unmarked, no return address. Inside, a USB with every recording, every text, every photo I'd collected. No message, just the evidence of her betrayal, raw and unfiltered. She called me that night, hysterical, begging to know why. "You did this," I said, my voice ice. "Live with it." She sobbed, promised to change, to earn me back. I hung up. She didn't get it, there was no back. She'd chosen him, and now she'd choke on the ashes. The kids were my shield. I took them camping, taught Lucas to fish, helped Emma with a science project. Their laughter drowned out the noise in my head. But at night, alone, I'd sit with my whiskey, plotting. James's fear, Claire's tears, they fed me, kept me sharp. I wasn't healing. I was hardening. Claire's turn came next. I'd spared her the spotlight long enough. I leaked the affair photos, carefully edited, her face clear, his blurred, to a gossip site. Not art world stuff, broader, trashier. Suburban wife's secret life hit the headlines. Her name splashed across it. I didn't link it to James's mess. Let people connect the dots. Her phone blew up. She told Emma in a tearful call. Old friends cut her off. Her parents called me furious, but I played dumb. She made her choices, I said, and they couldn't argue. She showed up at the house one night, soaked from rain, pounding on the door. The kids were asleep. Why are you doing this? She screamed, her voice raw. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. You did it to yourself, I said, calm, unyielding. She lunged at me, fists on my chest, sobbing. I didn't flinch. Go home, Claire. She collapsed on the porch, a broken thing, and I left her there, locking the door. She was gone by morning. James got wind of it, small world. I saw him at a gas station, eyes bloodshot, staring at me across the pumps. He knew. I stared back, unflinching, until he looked away. He didn't approach. Smart. I'd have broken his jaw, consequences be damned. His life was a landfill now, no wife, no kids, no hope. Mine wasn't much better, but I had Emma and Lucas. That was enough to keep going. I tightened my grip on custody. Claire's public spiral made it easy. Her lawyer didn't fight hard. She got weekends supervised, her eyes hollow when she picked them up. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. She was living her punishment, and I was just getting started. Months passed, and the dust settled into something I could live with. James vanished. Rumors said he'd left town, chasing some dead-end lead on a job. I didn't care enough to track him. He was a ghost, a memory I'd crushed underfoot. Claire stabilized, barely, waitressing, renting a room above a bar. She saw the kids, kept her head down, but the spark was gone. She'd message me sometimes, apologies I didn't read. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. Felt like survival. I focused on Emma and Lucas. We moved, new house, new start. Smaller, cozier hours. I coached Lucas's soccer team, took Emma to art classes. Real ones, not Claire's pretentious galleries. They thrived, and I fed off it, rebuilding what she'd shattered. Work promoted me. More responsibility, more pay. I was good at it, better than before. Pain had sharpened me, turned me into something harder, stronger. But I didn't stop watching. If James resurfaced, if Claire stepped out of line, I'd be ready. I kept the files, the evidence, locked in a safe. Insurance. Promise. They'd taken my trust, my peace, and I'd taken their lives. Not with violence, but with precision. I slept better now, the rage a low hum instead of a roar. The kids filled the silence, and I let them. Revenge wasn't the end, it was the means. I'd keep going. For them. For me. Until the past was just a scar I could ignore. And if it ever bled again, I'd be waiting.